The marble ballroom exploded into silence when she walked in. Pregnant, furious, unstoppable. Lucien Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in the city, stood frozen on stage beside his mistress while his wife approached with lawyers carrying documents thick enough to bury kingdoms. Nobody knew the truth. The billion-dollar empire he ruled wasn't his. It never was. Tonight, in front of every crime lord, politician, and killer in the room, Vivian Moretti would destroy the king who forgot she built his throne. Want to see how far a betrayed woman will go for revenge? Like this video, comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. And stay until the end, because this empire is about to burn. The chandeliers above the Blackthorn Grand Hotel ballroom cast golden light across 300 faces that belonged to men who'd killed, stolen, and corrupted their way to power. Politicians in custom Italian suits, underground financiers with blood money and offshore accounts, crime family heads whose handshakes were worth more than legal contracts. And at the center of it all, standing on a raised platform beneath a massive LED screen, cycling through images of luxury yachts and private islands, stood Lucien Moretti. He looked exactly like what he'd become, untouchable. The tailored black suit probably cost more than most people earned in a year. His dark hair was slicked back perfectly. Diamond cufflinks caught the light every time he raised his champagne glass. 2 bodyguards flanked him like shadows, hands resting near concealed weapons. The entire room watched him with a mixture of fear and calculated respect. Tonight wasn't a business meeting. It was a birthday party. For his mistress, Sabrina Vale stood beside him in a crimson gown that probably required its own security detail. She smiled at the crowd with practiced elegance, her hand resting possessively on Lucien's arm, while the LED screen behind them displayed photos that told an unmistakable story. Private jets, diamond necklaces, weekends in Monaco. Her face appeared in every single image, glowing with the kind of happiness that came from being worshipped by a dangerous man. Lucien raised his glass higher. "To the most important woman in my life," he announced. His voice carried authority that made people straighten their spines instinctively. "The one who reminds me every day why success tastes sweeter when you share it." Applause filled the ballroom, careful applause, the kind that comes from people who know what happens when you disrespect a man like Lucien Moretti. Sabrina leaned into him, whispering something that made him smirk. She kissed his cheek while cameras flashed. Several crime bosses exchanged knowing looks. Everyone understood what this party really meant. Lucien was publicly claiming his mistress as the woman who mattered, as the woman who deserved his empire's wealth and attention. The music swelled again, champagne flowed. Waiters in white gloves navigated through clusters of dangerous men discussing port shipments and political bribes like they were talking about the weather. Then the massive double doors at the entrance slammed open. The sound cut through the music like a gunshot. Every head turned. The orchestra stopped mid-note. A woman stood in the doorway, pregnant, visibly so. She wore a simple pale blue dress that looked almost deliberately plain compared to the excessive luxury filling the room. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders. No jewelry, no makeup that screamed for attention. She looked like someone who'd walked into the wrong event entirely. Except her eyes. Cold, focused, absolutely fearless. Behind her stood 2 men in dark suits and an older woman carrying a leather briefcase thick enough to contain legal documents that could end careers. Lucien's confident expression cracked. The champagne glass trembled slightly in his hand, because he recognized her immediately. Vivian Moretti, his wife. The woman he'd told was overseas on business. The woman he'd been avoiding for months. The woman who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near this hotel tonight. Whispers erupted across the ballroom like wildfire. Is that his wife? She's pregnant. Does she know about... Sabrina's grip tightened on Lucien's arm. Who is that? Lucien didn't answer, couldn't answer. His mind was racing through possibilities, excuses, explanations that might contain the disaster currently walking toward him across the marble floor. Vivian moved slowly, deliberately. One hand rested protectively over her pregnant belly, while the other hung loose at her side. She didn't look around at the crowd, didn't acknowledge the politicians or crime lords staring at her with mixed expressions of shock and anticipation. She only looked at Lucien. The entire walk from the entrance to the stage probably took 30 seconds. It felt like an execution march. When she finally stopped at the base of the platform, close enough that Lucian could see the absolute calm fury in her expression, the silence in the room became suffocating. "Enjoying your party, Lucian." Her voice was quiet, controlled, more terrifying than any scream could have been. "Good. Because tonight, your empire finally learns the truth." Lucian's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, away from Sabrina, trying to regain some semblance of control. "This is private business, Vivian. Go home." "Private business?" Vivian's eyebrow lifted slightly. "You mean like the private business displayed on that screen behind you? The yachts I didn't know we owned? The trips I wasn't invited to? The diamonds purchased with money that doesn't belong to you?" Several men in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Lucien descended from the stage, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper meant only for her. "You're embarrassing yourself. Leave. Now." "No." That single word carried more weight than Lucien had ever heard from her before. One of the suited men beside Vivian stepped forward, extending a business card toward Lucien. "Mr. Moretti, my name is Richard Chen. I represent Varela International Holdings. We need to discuss the actual ownership structure of your organization." Lucien stared at the card like it might explode. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." The attorney, because that's clearly what he was, opened the leather briefcase and pulled out several document folders. "Or rather, you're about to." The older woman spoke next, her voice sharp and professional. "Mr. Moretti, are you aware that you do not hold controlling financial interest in the Moretti organization?" Lucien's laugh came out harsh and disbelieving. "That's insane! I built this empire from nothing." "You built it," Vivian said quietly, "with money that wasn't yours." The whispers in the crowd grew louder. Lucien's face flushed red. "What the hell are you talking about?" Richard Chen handed him the first folder. "These documents detail the corporate structure of your operations, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the property holdings. Would you like to know who actually owns them?" Lucien grabbed the folder, his hands shaking slightly as he flipped through pages of legal text and financial breakdowns. His eyes scanned frantically, looking for something that made sense, looking for proof this was some kind of mistake. Then he saw the name repeated across multiple documents. Varela International Holdings. Owner, Vivian Moretti, née Varela. The folder slipped from his fingers, papers scattered across the marble floor. "No," he whispered. Vivian watched him with an expression that might have been pity once. Now it was just cold observation. "My father is Dominic Varela. Perhaps you've heard of him." Every crime boss in the room had heard of Dominic Varela, the billionaire whose legitimate corporations controlled ports, casinos, luxury hotels, and financial networks that stretched across continents. The man whose power existed so far above street-level organized crime that most mafia families only whispered his name with reverence. Lucien's face went pale. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice had lost its authority. The female attorney spoke again. 6 years ago, when you were still operating as a mid-level enforcer with ambitions beyond your resources, Varela International began quietly funding your expansion, shell company investments, political connections, infrastructure access, the foundation of everything you currently control." Another folder landed in Lucien's hands. The Obsidian Casino, the Westport shipping terminals, the Meridian Hotel chain, even this building. She gestured around the ballroom. All owned through Varela Holdings, all legally controlled by Mrs. Vivian Moretti. Lucien's mind reeled backward through years of deals he'd thought were his own cleverness, doors that had opened too easily, investments that had appeared at exactly the right moment, political favors that seemed too convenient. He looked at Vivian like he was seeing a stranger. "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why didn't you tell me?" Vivian's hand rested over her pregnant belly. "Because I wanted to know if you'd love me without the power, before it corrupted you." She paused. "I got my answer." Sabrina suddenly appeared beside Lucien, her earlier confidence replaced by visible panic. "Lucien, tell them they're wrong. Tell them you own everything." He couldn't speak. Vivian looked directly at Sabrina for the first time. "The penthouse on Fifth Avenue where he visits you? Varela property. The diamonds he gave you last month? Purchased through accounts I control. This entire party?" She gestured around the ballroom. funded with money that legally belongs to me. Sabrina's face transformed through several emotions: shock, humiliation, rage, before settling on cold calculation. She looked at Lucien with disgust. "You've been playing dress-up with someone else's fortune?" "Sabrina, wait." Lucien reached for her arm. She jerked away like he was diseased. "I don't attach myself to weak men who live off a woman's wealth." Her voice rose loud enough for half the ballroom to hear. "You're pathetic." Then she walked away. Just like that. Through the crowd that parted for her like water, out the double doors, gone. The woman he'd spent millions on, the woman he'd publicly celebrated as his future, disappeared the moment she realized the power wasn't real. Lucien stood alone in the center of the ballroom while 300 pairs of eyes watched his empire disintegrate in real time. A capo from one of the allied families approached cautiously. "Lucien, is this true? You don't actually own the ports?" Another voice from the crowd. "What about the casino revenue shares? The political protection deals? Were those real?" Questions bombarded him from every direction. Lucien's carefully constructed authority was evaporating like smoke. These men didn't fear him anymore. They were calculating, reconsidering, wondering how much of his power had been borrowed and what that meant for their own alliances. Vivian watched it all with quiet satisfaction. Richard Chen handed Lucien one final folder, thicker than the others. "Divorce papers," he said simply. "Mrs. Moretti is prepared to offer you a settlement that includes operational control of certain street-level businesses. The legitimate holdings will remain under Varela ownership." Lucien stared at the folder like it contained a death sentence. "Vivian, please. We can fix this. I'll end everything with Sabrina. You'll what?" Vivian's voice cut through his desperation. "Love me again? Be faithful? Appreciate what we built together?" She shook her head slowly. "You didn't betray me once, Lucien. You betrayed me every single day you chose ego over loyalty." "I still love you." The words came out desperate, pathetic. Vivian looked at him with something that might have been sadness. "No, you loved the feeling of being powerful. You loved having everyone fear you. You loved the image more than the reality." Her hand moved to her belly again. "And now everyone in this room knows you were never really king." She turned to leave. "Wait!" Lucien grabbed her wrist. The two suited men beside her moved instantly, hands going to concealed weapons. Vivian raised her free hand slightly, stopping them. She looked down at Lucien's grip on her wrist, then back up to his face. "Let go, Lucien." Something in her tone, absolute finality, made his fingers release involuntarily. Vivian walked toward the ballroom exit. The crowd parted for her immediately. Several crime bosses actually nodded respectfully as she passed. The armed guards at the door opened it wide, treating her like visiting royalty. Before she disappeared through the doorway, she turned back one last time. "Oh, and Lucien? The bodyguards you hired to protect you tonight? They're employed by Varela Security. As of this moment, they answer to me." The two men who'd stood beside Lucien for the past year immediately stepped away from him, repositioning themselves near the entrance. Lucien stood completely alone, the most feared mafia boss in the city. Abandoned by his mistress, divorced by his wife, revealed as a puppet in front of every ally and rival who mattered. One of the older crime family heads, a man named Vincent Calabrese, who'd treated Lucien as an equal for years, approached slowly. His expression was carefully neutral. "Lucien, we should talk about the arrangements we made regarding the southern territories." Translation: "Now that you're not really in control, I'm taking back what I gave you." Another boss stepped forward. "The revenue sharing from the casino operations needs to be renegotiated." Translation: "You don't deserve the percentage we agreed on when we thought you had real power." They were circling, smelling blood, preparing to tear apart everything he'd built, everything he'd thought was his, before the night even ended. Lucien's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. A text message from one of his most trusted captains. "Boss, we have a problem. 3 shipments just got seized at the port. Federal agents everywhere. Someone talked." Another message appeared immediately after from a different lieutenant. "The West Side crew just declared independence. They're not answering to us anymore." Then another. "Politicians are backing out. Nobody's returning calls. The empire was collapsing in real time. Without Varela protection, Without Vivian's father's invisible hand smoothing the way, every vulnerability Lucien had ignored suddenly became fatal. Rival organizations who'd been waiting for weakness attacked immediately. Law enforcement that had been paid to look away suddenly found their courage. Political allies who'd feared Varela power abandoned ship before they got dragged down too. Lucien looked around the ballroom at faces that had smiled at him an hour ago. Now they watched him like wolves watching wounded prey. Vincent Calabrese lit a cigar slowly. "You should leave, Lucien, before things get uncomfortable." It wasn't a suggestion. Lucien's jaw clenched, his hands curled into fists. Every instinct screamed to fight back, to assert dominance, to remind these men what happened when you disrespected him. But he had no power to back it up. The bodyguards who used to enforce his authority now served Vivian. The money he used to buy loyalty legally belonged to someone else. The political connections that made him untouchable had evaporated the moment Vivian walked out the door. He was just a man in an expensive suit surrounded by people who no longer feared him. Lucien turned and walked toward the exit, alone. The crowd didn't part for him the way it had for Vivian. He had to push through clusters of men who barely moved aside, their conversations continuing like he wasn't even there. The marble floor seemed to stretch forever. When he finally reached the doors, the guards didn't acknowledge him, didn't open them. He had to push them open himself. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside. Black cars lined the street, vehicles that belonged to other crime families, other bosses, other men with real power. His own car was gone. Of course it was. It had been a Varela Company vehicle. Lucien stood on the sidewalk outside the hotel where he'd just thrown $1 million party for his mistress, where his empire had been publicly executed, where his wife had revealed him as nothing more than a well-dressed fraud. His phone buzzed again, and again, and again. Each message brought new disasters, defections, betrayals, attacks from rivals who'd been waiting years for this exact moment. Lucien looked up at the illuminated windows of the Blackthorn Grand Hotel, property that had never belonged to him, and finally understood the truth. He hadn't built an empire. He'd been allowed to play emperor, and Vivian had just revoked his crown in front of everyone who mattered. The worst part wasn't the humiliation. It wasn't the collapse of his organization. It wasn't even losing Sabrina, who'd proven herself exactly as shallow as everyone except him had known. The worst part was remembering the woman Vivian had been 6 years ago. Quiet, kind, standing beside him when he had nothing but ambition and violence, believing in him when nobody else did, loving him before power corrupted everything. He destroyed the one person who'd actually cared about the man beneath the crown. And now, standing alone on a cold sidewalk while his empire burned, Lucien Moretti finally felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Fear. Real fear. Not of rivals or law enforcement or political enemies. Fear of what came next when you had nothing left except the consequences of your own betrayal. The penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue, the one Lucien had believed was his reward for climbing to the top, felt like a mausoleum now. He stood in the center of the living room at 3 a.m, still wearing the suit from the party, staring at furniture that belonged to someone else. Everything belonged to someone else. His phone had finally stopped buzzing around midnight, not because the crisis had ended, because people had stopped bothering to inform him about disasters he couldn't fix. Lucien poured himself whiskey from a crystal decanter. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the glass. The amber liquid caught the city lights streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. How many times had he stood in this exact spot, feeling invincible? How many times had Sabrina kissed him right here, telling him he was the most powerful man she'd ever known? The glass shattered against the wall. Whiskey dripped down expensive wallpaper that had never been his to damage. His phone rang. Marco, one of his oldest captains, a man who'd been with him since the beginning, when they were both just hungry street enforcers looking for a way up. Lucien answered, "Tell me something good." "Can't do that, boss." Marco's voice sounded exhausted. "The Calabrese family hit 3 of our collection routes tonight. Took everything. When our guys tried to push back, they said we don't have Varela protection anymore, so the territories are open." "How many men did we lose?" 2 dead, 5 in the hospital, the rest scattered." Lucien closed his eyes. "Where are you now?" "Safe house in Brooklyn. Listen, Lucien, I need to ask you something straight." "Ask." "Is it true? Everything that lawyer said at the party? You don't actually own anything?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lucien wanted to lie, wanted to say it was all a misunderstanding, that Vivian was just a bitter wife trying to embarrass him, that he still controlled the empire. But Marco deserved the truth. "It's true," Lucien said quietly. "Her father built the foundation. I just operated on top of it." Silence on the other end. Then, "Jesus Christ, Lucien. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know until tonight." "That doesn't matter now." Marco's voice hardened. "Half the crew is talking about jumping ship. The other half is waiting to see what the Varela family does next. Nobody wants to go down with you." "What about you?" Another pause. "I'm still here, aren't I? But I can't promise that means anything if things get worse." The line went dead. Lucien stood there holding the phone, feeling the ground shift beneath his feet. Marco was loyal, had been loyal for 6 years. If he was wavering, everyone else was already gone. A key turned in the lock. Lucien spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun at his waistband. The door opened. Vincent Calabrese walked in like he owned the place. Because maybe he did now. 2 of his men flanked him, hands visible but close to concealed weapons. "How'd you get a key?" Lucien's voice came out flat. Vincent smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Building management was very cooperative once I explained the situation. Turns out the Varela family owns this property. They were happy to accommodate new arrangements." He crossed to the bar, pouring himself whiskey from the same decanter Lucien had just thrown. "You look like hell. What do you want, Vincent?" "To talk business, like civilized men." Vincent settled into the leather chair that Sabrina used to drape herself across. "You're in a difficult position." "No shit. I'm here to offer a solution." Lucien laughed bitterly. "Let me guess. I hand over everything I have left, and you graciously allow me to keep breathing?" Vincent sipped his whiskey thoughtfully. "Not quite. I'm proposing a partnership." "Why would you partner with someone who just got publicly humiliated?" "Because you still have something valuable." Vincent leaned forward. "You know how the street-level operations work. You know the crews, the suppliers, the dirty cops who take payments. That knowledge is worth something. I'm not working for you. Not for me. With me. I need someone who understands the ground-level business. You need protection from the 5 other families currently sharpening their knives." Vincent spread his hands. "We help each other." Lucien wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to throw him out of the apartment, wanted to prove he didn't need anyone's charity, but pride was a luxury he couldn't afford anymore. "What's the split?" he asked. 70-30, I handle the political connections and territory protection. You manage operations." 70-30 in whose favor? Vincent's smile widened. "Mine, obviously. You're negotiating from a position of weakness, Lucien. Don't pretend otherwise." Every instinct screamed to refuse, to fight, to prove he was still the man everyone feared. Instead, Lucien nodded slowly. "I need guarantees, protection from the other families, access to resources." "Done, as long as you're useful." Vincent stood, buttoning his suit jacket. "Oh, and one more thing. That wife of yours, Vivian, I'd advise making peace with her." "Why?" "Because the Varela family decides who operates and who disappears in this city. If she wants you dead, you're dead. If she wants you broken, you're broken. But if you can convince her to be neutral," Vincent shrugged, "you might survive this." He walked toward the door, his men following. "Vincent," the older man paused. "Why are you really doing this?" Lucien asked. "You could just take everything. Why offer partnership?" Vincent looked back with an expression that was almost pitying. "Because I remember when you were hungry, when you had fire instead of ego." He paused at the threshold. "I'm betting there's still some of that man left. But if I'm wrong, the 70-30 split makes it easy to cut you loose." Then he was gone. Lucien stood alone again in the penthouse that wasn't his, contemplating a partnership that felt like surrender. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Varela Tower, 47th floor. Come alone. V. Vivian." She wanted a meeting. Lucien's jaw clenched. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to prove he didn't come when summoned, but Vincent's words echoed in his mind. "If she wants you dead, you're dead." He texted back. "I'll be there." The response came immediately. Good. Don't be late. Varela Tower stood in the financial district like a monument to legitimate power. 63 floors of glass and steel housing corporations, law firms, and investment banks that moved more money in a day than most criminal organizations saw in a year. Lucien had passed this building 1,000 times and never once realized it belonged to his wife's family. The lobby was all marble and modern art. Security guards in crisp uniforms watched everyone who entered. Lucien approached the desk, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked. His suit was expensive, but it carried the wear of a sleepless night. His eyes were bloodshot. He probably smelled like whiskey and desperation. "Lucien Moretti," he told the receptionist. "I have a meeting on the 47th floor." She checked her computer, then handed him a visitor badge. "Elevator Bank C. You've been cleared for executive access." The elevator was empty. Lucien watched the numbers climb, each floor taking him further into territory he didn't understand. This wasn't his world. Street-level crime, violent enforcement, dirty money moving through underground channels. That made sense. But this? Corporate empires and legitimate billions? He'd been playing in the minor leagues while Vivian's family owned the stadium. The 47th floor was eerily quiet. Thick carpet absorbed sound. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of the city that made everything below look small and manageable. Abstract paintings hung on walls. Everything screamed expensive taste. A woman in her 50s stood waiting. Professional, severe, the same attorney from last night. "Mr. Moretti, follow me, please." She led him down a hallway, past empty conference rooms and executive offices. At the end, she opened a door to a corner office that was probably bigger than most apartments. Vivian sat behind a glass desk, reading documents. She didn't look up when he entered. "Sit," she said. Lucien sat in one of the chairs facing the desk. The attorney positioned herself near the door. Armed guard or witness, he couldn't tell which. Vivian finally looked up. She'd changed from last night's simple dress into a black pantsuit that made her look every inch the corporate power player she apparently was. Her pregnancy showed more clearly now, without the flowing dress to hide it. "You look terrible," she observed. "Didn't sleep much." "I imagine not." She set down the documents. "Do you know what these are?" "No idea." "Financial reports from your operations over the past 6 months. Revenue streams, expenditures, profit margins." She slid one across the desk. "This one details the money you spent on Sabrina. $2.3 million in 6 months. Lucien didn't reach for the paper. "Want to know what else happened in those 6 months? Vivian continued. "I sold my grandmother's jewelry collection to help cover what you said were temporary cash flow problems. I fired our housekeeper to cut costs. I stopped buying new clothes because you said we needed to be careful with money." Her voice remained calm, controlled, which somehow made it worse. "While I was selling family heirlooms, you were buying your mistress a penthouse." "Vivian, I'm not finished." She leaned back in her chair. "I want you to understand something, Lucien. I didn't expose you last night because I was angry. I exposed you because you needed to see the truth." "What truth?" "That you never had real power. You had access to my father's power, and you mistook that for your own." Lucien's hands gripped the armrests. "I built the street operations from nothing. That was mine. Built with whose money? Whose political connections? Whose infrastructure?" Vivian shook her head. "You're a talented operator, Lucien. I won't deny that. You understand the criminal underworld better than most. But talent means nothing without resources. And all your resources came from my family. So what now? You take everything and leave me with nothing?" "That depends on you." Lucien frowned. "What does that mean?" Vivian pulled out another document. "This is a business proposal. My father believes you could still be useful despite your spectacular stupidity with Sabrina." "Useful how?" "The Varela family has legitimate businesses that occasionally require less legitimate problem solving. Someone who understands how criminal organizations operate. Someone who can handle situations that corporate lawyers can't touch." She slid the document across. "We're offering you a position as a consultant." Lucien stared at the paper without touching it. A consultant. With a salary. Benefits. And most importantly, protection from the 5 families currently trying to kill you. In exchange for what? Your expertise, your connections, your operational knowledge. Vivian's eyes hardened.
and your absolute loyalty to Varela interests. So I'd be working for your father. You'd be working for the family, which includes me.
Lucian laughed bitterly. You want me to take orders from my pregnant ex-wife? I want you to survive what's coming. Vivian stood, walking to the window. Do you know what happened after you left the party last night? I can guess. 3 families made moves on your territories. The federal task force that's been building a case against you suddenly got very aggressive, and 2 of your most trusted captains approached my father asking for employment opportunities. That last one hit like a punch. Who? Does it matter? They saw the writing on the wall. Either join the winning side or go down with you. Lucian's jaw clenched. Marco? Vivian didn't answer, which was answer enough. He's been with me for 6 years, and now he's looking at federal prison if he stays loyal to a sinking ship. Vivian turned from the window. This is what I'm trying to make you understand. You don't have an empire anymore. You have a target on your back and a rapidly shrinking list of allies. So I should just surrender? Become your father's errand boy? You should accept reality. Vivian walked back to the desk. You have 2 options. Take the consulting position, work under Varela protection, and rebuild some semblance of a life. Or refuse, try to fight back with resources you don't have, and end up either dead or in federal prison. That's not a choice. No, it's a consequence. Vivian sat down again. Consequences for every lie you told, every dollar you spent on Sabrina while I ate cheap takeout at home, every night you claimed to be handling business while you were actually in her bed. Her voice finally cracked slightly on that last word. I loved you, she said quietly. 6 years ago, I loved you so much I was willing to hide who I really was, just to know if you'd love me back. And you did. For a while. Before the power poisoned everything. Lucian felt something breaking inside his chest. I still... Don't! Vivian held up a hand. Don't tell me you still love me. You don't even know what that word means anymore. Silence filled the office. The attorney near the door shifted slightly, uncomfortable witnessing something that felt too raw for business. The divorce papers are already filed, Vivian continued. I'm not asking you to fight it. I'm asking you to sign them and move forward. What about the baby? Vivian's hand moved protectively to her stomach. That's no longer your concern. It's my child. Biologically, yes, but you won't be raising it. You won't have custody. You'll have supervised visitation rights if you're lucky, depending on how cooperative you are with the Varela family. Lucian stood abruptly. You can't do that. I can do anything I want, Lucian. That's what you still don't understand. Vivian remained seated, calm. I control everything you thought was yours. Your businesses, your properties, your protection. Even the loyalty of men you believed would die for you. This is about revenge. No. This is about consequences. She stood now, facing him across the desk. If I wanted revenge, you'd already be dead. My father offered to make that happen. Very quietly. Very permanently. Lucien felt ice in his veins. Why didn't you? Because despite everything, some small part of me remembers the man you used to be. The one who worked construction during the day and dreamed about something better. The one who made me laugh. The one who promised me we'd build something real together. Tears formed in her eyes but didn't fall. That man is gone. You killed him when you chose ego over love, but I still remember him, and for his sake I'm giving you this one chance to survive. She pushed the consultant contract closer. Sign it, work for my family. Rebuild your life slowly and quietly, or walk out of here and try to survive on your own. Lucian looked at the contract, at the pen lying beside it, at the woman he'd married 6 years ago who'd transformed into someone he didn't recognize. If I sign this, what happens to my crew? The men who are still loyal? The ones with clean records can apply for legitimate employment through Varela corporations. The ones facing charges are on their own unless they have valuable information to trade. And Marco? Vivian's expression softened slightly. Marco already signed with us yesterday. He's being relocated to Chicago to manage a shipping operation. He asked me to tell you he's sorry, but he has a family to protect. That hurt more than anything else. Marco hadn't even called to explain, just jumped ship and ran. Lucian reached for the pen, then stopped. What if I don't sign? What if I try to rebuild on my own? Then you'll be dead within a month. Vivian said it matter-of-factly. The other families are circling. Federal agents are building cases. You have no money, no protection, and no political cover. You'll end up in prison or in the ground. Maybe that's better than becoming your puppet.
Then you're even more of a fool than I thought. Lucian's hand hovered over the pen. Pride screamed at him to refuse, to fight back, to prove he was still dangerous. But survival whispered something else. He picked up the pen. Vivian watched him with an unreadable expression. Lucian signed his name at the bottom of the contract. Each stroke of the pen felt like carving away pieces of himself. When he finished, Vivian took the document and placed it in a folder.
You start Monday. Report to the address on page 3. Someone will explain your initial assignments. That's it? What else did you expect? I don't know. Something. Vivian stood walking toward the door. The meeting was over. Vivian, she paused. I really did love you. Still do, probably. I just got lost. She looked back at him. I know. That's the tragedy of all this. You had everything that mattered and didn't realize it until it was gone. Can we ever…
No. The word was final.
We can't. That door is closed, Lucienne. Forever. She opened the office door. The attorney stepped aside. Goodbye, Lucienne. He walked past her into the hallway, feeling her eyes on his back. The elevator ride down felt like descending into a tomb. 3 days later, Lucienne stood in a warehouse in Red Hook, watching longshoremen unload shipping containers under Vincent Calabrese's supervision. This was his new reality. Not running operations, but watching other men run them. Not making decisions, but implementing orders from people who actually held power. Vincent handed him a clipboard. These are the weekly shipment manifests. I need you to verify inventory matches what's listed. Look for discrepancies. This is what I'm doing now, checking boxes. This is what you're doing until you prove you're worth more. Vincent lit a cigar. Did you think you'd sign one contract and suddenly be back in charge? You're starting from the bottom, Lucy. Be grateful it's not the grave. A black sedan pulled up outside the warehouse. 2 men got out. Lucienne recognized them immediately. Varela Security, the same type who'd stood with Vivian at the party. One of them approached Vincent. Mr. Calabrese, we need to borrow Mr. Moretti. Vincent frowned. He's working. Varela family business, non-negotiable. Vincent looked at Lucian. Go. Don't keep them waiting. Lucian followed the security team to the sedan. They didn't speak during the ride. Didn't explain where they were going, just drove in tense silence through Brooklyn traffic. They pulled up to a brownstone in Park Slope. Nice neighborhood, quiet. Not the kind of place Lucian associated with criminal business. Inside, one of the guards said. 3rd floor. Lucian climbed the stairs, his confusion growing. This felt wrong. Too residential, too normal. The 3rd floor apartment door was unlocked. He pushed it open. Vivian stood in the living room, surrounded by moving boxes. She wore jeans and a loose sweater. Her pregnancy was more visible now. She looked tired. What is this? Lucienne asked. My new apartment. She gestured around. I'm moving out of the penthouse. Too many bad memories. Why am I here? Vivian pulled something from her purse. An envelope. Ultrasound photos. From yesterday's appointment. She handed them to him. It's a boy. Lucian looked at the grainy black and white images. His son. A child he'd helped create, but would barely know. Why show me this? Because despite everything, you deserve to know. Vivian sat down carefully in one of the few chairs not covered in boxes. I'm not trying to erase you from his life completely. I'm just making sure you understand your place in it. Which is what? Stranger who sends birthday cards? That depends on you, system. Vivian's hand rested on her belly. If you prove yourself trustworthy, if you work hard and stay clean, maybe supervised visits become real visitation. Maybe our son gets to know his father. And if I don't? Then you stay a name on legal documents and nothing more. Lucienne sat down across from her, still holding the ultrasound photos. I destroyed us, he said quietly. I know that now. Yes, you did. I'd take it all back if I could. Vivian looked at him with something that might have been sadness. But you can't.
That's not how life works. You made choices, and now we both live with consequences. Do you hate me? She considered that. No, hate requires too much energy. I'm just tired. Tired of being disappointed. Tired of mourning what we could have been. I'm sorry. I know. Vivian stood slowly. But sorry doesn't rebuild trust. Only time and actions do that. Maybe in a few years, if you've proven yourself, we can have a civil relationship for our son's sake. A few years? That's how long it takes to undo the damage you caused. She walked to the door, opening it. You can keep the photos. Share them with whoever you want. But this conversation is over. Lucien stood, still clutching the ultrasound images. He wanted to say more, wanted to fix things right now, wanted to prove he could change. But Vivian's expression told him everything he needed to know. Some doors, once closed, don't reopen just because you finally understand what you lost. He walked out of the apartment. The security guards were waiting downstairs. They drove him back to the warehouse in silence. Lucien spent the rest of the day checking inventory like Vincent ordered, but his mind was elsewhere, on ultrasound photos of a son he might never really know, on a wife who'd loved him before power corrupted everything, on an empire that had never been his to lose. That night, alone in a studio apartment that was all he could afford now, Lucien stared at his reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror. The man looking back wasn't the feared mafia boss who'd commanded respect and fear, just a broken fool who'd gambled everything on ego and lost. And the worst part was knowing he'd done it to himself. Every choice, every lie, every moment he'd chosen Sabrina's worship over Vivian's loyalty. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. They're coming for you tonight. Get out. Now. A friend. Lucien's blood went cold. He grabbed his gun from the nightstand, moving to the window. 3 black SUVs were pulling up outside his building. Not Varela security. Something else. The point of no return had just arrived at his door, and Lucien Moretti was about to discover that signing Vivian's contract hadn't guaranteed his safety. It had only delayed the inevitable. Lucien killed the lights and moved away from the window, his gun gripped tight enough to make his knuckles white. 3 SUVs meant at least 9 men, maybe 12. Too many for a straight fight in a studio apartment with one exit. He grabbed his phone, dialing the emergency number Vivian's security team had given him when he signed the contract. It rang 4 times. No answer. Come on. Voicemail. Lucien's stomach dropped. Varela protection was supposed to be absolute. That was the whole point of surrendering his pride and signing that contract. But nobody was answering. Heavy footsteps echoed in the stairwell. Multiple sets, coming up fast. Lucien moved to the apartment door, pressing his ear against the cheap wood. He could hear them now, coordinated movement, professional spacing, not street thugs, trained operators. His mind raced through options. The fire escape led to an alley that would be covered. The front door meant walking into whoever was coming up the stairs. The windows faced a 3-story drop onto concrete. No good choices. The footsteps stopped outside his door. Silence. Then a voice, calm and measured. Mr. Moretti, we're not here to hurt you. We just need to talk. Lucien didn't recognize the voice. Who sent you? Someone who wants to help. But we need to move quickly. You have about 3 minutes before the real problem arrives. What real problem? The people who actually want you dead. A key scraped in the lock. Lucien raised his gun, aiming at the door. It swung open slowly. A man in his 40s stood in the doorway, hands visible and empty. Expensive suit, wire-rimmed glasses. He looked more like a lawyer than a killer. My name is David Chen, he said. I'm Vivian's attorney. The one from the party. Lucien didn't lower the gun. Richard was her attorney. Richard handles corporate litigation. I handle the situations that lawyers aren't supposed to know about. David stepped inside carefully, 2 armed men flanking him. We need to leave. Now. Why should I trust you? Because if I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. David gestured toward the window. Look outside. See that white van across the street? Lucien moved to the window, keeping his gun trained on David. A white panel van sat parked under a broken streetlight. That van arrived 6 minutes ago, David continued. 4 men inside, based on thermal imaging.
They're waiting for us to leave so they can come up and make this look like a robbery gone wrong. Who are they? That's what we need to discuss. But not here. David checked his watch. We have 90 seconds before they realize we're taking too long and adjust their plan. Lucien's survival instincts warred with his paranoia. Trust no one had kept him alive for years. But David was right. If Varela wanted him dead, they wouldn't bother with this elaborate theater. Where are we going? Somewhere secure. Move. Lucien grabbed his jacket and followed David into the hallway. The two armed men formed a protective corridor, one ahead and one behind. They took the back stairs, moving quickly but not running. Professional, controlled. A black sedan waited in the alley, engine running. Inside, David ordered. Lucien climbed into the back seat. David slid in beside him. The two guards took positions in the front. The car pulled out smoothly, taking a route that avoided the main street where the white van waited. Lucien looked back through the rear window. No pursuit. Yet. Start talking, he said. Who's trying to kill me? David pulled out a tablet, swiping through files. That's complicated. You've made a lot of enemies recently. Narrow it down. The Calabrese family, for starters. Lucien's head snapped toward him. Vincent? We just made a deal. I'm working for him. You're working with him. There's a difference. And apparently Vincent decided you're more valuable dead than alive. That doesn't make sense. He needs my operational knowledge. He needed leverage over you, which he got when you signed his contract. Now he's planning to eliminate you before you become a liability. David showed him the tablet screen. Surveillance photos of Vincent meeting with two men Lucien didn't recognize. These were taken yesterday. Vincent contracted a hit team from Detroit. They specialize in making problems disappear quietly. Lucien felt like he'd been punched. The bastard smiled to my face while planning my execution. Welcome to the world your wife has been navigating while you played crime boss. David swiped to another file. But Vincent isn't your biggest problem. What could be bigger than a hit squad? David's expression darkened. Sabrina Vale. Lucien laughed bitterly. Sabrina ran the second she found out I was broke. She's not a threat. You're wrong. David had pulled up financial records. Sabrina didn't just walk away. She's been very busy. Turns out she's been working with federal investigators for the past 8 months. The world tilted sideways. What? Sabrina was an FBI informant. The entire relationship was an operation designed to gather evidence against you. David showed him file after file. Bank records, wire transfer details, photos of Sabrina meeting with federal agents. Every gift you gave her, every conversation about business, every detail of your operations, she documented all of it. Lucien stared at the evidence, his mind struggling to process. That's impossible. I vetted her, had her background checked. She had a very convincing legend. The FBI put significant resources into building her cover. David zoomed in on one document. They were planning to arrest you 3 weeks from now. The party at the Blackthorn Grand actually disrupted their timeline. So where's she now? Witness protection. Disappeared the night of the party, but she left behind enough evidence to build cases against you and 17 other targets in your organization. Lucien's hands clenched into fists. I gave her everything. She took everything. That was the assignment. David closed the tablet. Which brings us to why you're still alive. I'm listening. Mrs. Moretti wants to make you an offer, a real one this time, not the consultant position that was essentially a leash to keep you controlled. What kind of offer? The kind that requires you to do something extremely dangerous in exchange for permanent protection. The sedan turned onto a private road leading to what looked like an industrial park. Warehouses and storage facilities stretched into darkness. They pulled up to a nondescript building. The guards got out first, scanning the area before opening Lucien's door. David led him inside. The exterior had been deliberately run down to avoid attention, but inside the space was transformed into a high-tech operations center. Computer monitors covered one wall. Maps with color-coded markers showed territory breakdowns across the city. Armed security personnel moved with military precision. And in the center of it all, standing over a conference table covered in documents, was Vivian. She looked up when Lucien entered. No surprise in her expression. She'd known he was coming. Sit down, Lucien. He sat across from her at the table. David took a position near the door. You knew about the hit squad, Lucien said. That's why nobody answered my emergency call.
We knew Vincent would make a move eventually, we just didn't know when. Vivian slid a folder across the table. This is everything we have on Sabrina's FBI operation. Lucian didn't open it. Why show me this now? Because you need to understand the full picture before I tell you what comes next. Which is what? Vivian leaned back in her chair, one hand resting protectively over her pregnant belly. My father has decided you're still useful, but not in the way you think. I'm done being useful to people who treat me like a pawn. Then you'll die. Vivian's voice remained calm. Vincent wants you dead. The FBI wants you in prison for the next 20 years. 4 other crime families see you as an easy target to prove their strength. You have no money, no crew, and no protection except what my family provides. So I'm trapped. You're being given an opportunity. Vivian opened another folder. The Varela family has been planning to eliminate certain competitors for years, rival organizations that interfere with our legitimate business interests. We need someone who understands street-level operations to help execute those plans. You want me to kill people for you? I want you to help dismantle criminal organizations that are obstacles to our interests. How that happens? Violence, legal manipulation, strategic betrayals, depends on the situation. Lucien studied her face, looking for some trace of the woman he'd married. When did you become this cold? When I realized the world doesn't reward kindness, it rewards power. Vivian's eyes hardened. You taught me that, actually. Every time you chose Sabrina over me. Every time you lied about where you were spending our money. Every time you made me feel small and worthless while you played king. So this is revenge. No, this is business. Vivian stood, walking to the wall of monitors. You can accept this assignment and earn real protection, or you can walk out that door and try to survive on your own. But understand, if you leave, I can't stop what's coming for you. What's the assignment? Vivian pressed a button on a remote. One of the monitors displayed a photograph of a man in his 60s. Distinguished. Expensive suit. Cold eyes. Antonio Delgado runs the largest human trafficking network on the East Coast. He uses legitimate shipping companies owned by Varela International to move his product. My father wants him gone. Why not just stop doing business with him? Because Delgado has leverage, files, evidence of Varela family involvement in certain activities that need to stay buried. If we cut him off, he'll release that information to federal investigators. So you need him dead before he can talk. We need his entire operation dismantled and his evidence destroyed. That requires someone who can get close to his organization, identify the key players, and eliminate them systematically. Lucien looked at the photograph. I don't know, Delgado. I never worked trafficking. No. But you know how criminal organizations function. You know how to identify weaknesses. And most importantly, you're desperate enough to do whatever it takes. Vivian turned from the monitors. Delgado is recruiting new talent, people who understand distribution networks. Vincent Calabrese has already recommended you as someone looking for work after your recent difficulties. The pieces clicked together. This was planned. You knew Vincent would turn on me. We encouraged it. Vincent needed to believe eliminating you was his idea. That way, when you approach Delgado looking for protection, your desperation will seem genuine. Lucien felt like he was drowning. You set me up. I created an opportunity. Whether you use it or waste it is your choice. What happens after I get inside Delgado's organization? David stepped forward, pulling up detailed files on the monitor. You identify his evidence cache, you map his distribution network. You feed us information that allows us to dismantle his operation piece by piece. When the time is right, you eliminate Delgado and anyone else who knows about the Varela family's involvement. How long? 3 months, maybe 4? Delgado is paranoid. Building trust will take time. Lucien stood, pacing the room. And if I succeed? Full protection, a legitimate position within Varela International, and visitation rights with your son. Vivian's voice softened slightly on that last part. Real visitation. Not supervised, not controlled. Actual time to be a father. That stopped him. You'd let me see my son, if you prove you can be trusted. If you complete this assignment without betraying us. If you show me the man you used to be still exists somewhere underneath the wreckage. Vivian's hand moved to her belly. He deserves to know his father, but only if his father is someone worth knowing.
Lucien looked at the monitors showing Delgado's photograph, then at Vivian's determined expression, then at David's cold professionalism. What if I refuse? Vivian pulled out her phone, pressing a single button. The monitors switched to live surveillance feeds. The first showed Vincent Calabrese meeting with the Detroit hit squad, handing over a briefcase of cash. The second showed FBI agents reviewing files in an office, Sabrina's testimony playing on a screen. The third showed Lucien's studio apartment, now crawling with men in tactical gear searching for evidence. If you refuse, Vivian said quietly, I withdraw Varela protection. Vincent's hit squad finds you within 24 hours. If you somehow survive that, the FBI arrests you within 48 hours based on Sabrina's evidence. Either way, you're dead or in prison before the weekends. That's not a choice. No. It's consequences. Everything you're facing now is because of decisions you made. Choosing Sabrina, choosing ego, choosing power over loyalty. Vivian's voice cracked slightly. I'm giving you one chance to make a different choice, to prove you can still be the man I believed in 6 years ago. Lucien stared at the feeds showing the walls closing in around him, every exit blocked, every option eliminated. Survival required becoming exactly what Vivian's family needed him to be. When do I start? Tomorrow. David will brief you on Delgado's operation and arrange your introduction. Vivian turned away, facing the monitors. And Lucien, don't betray us. My father doesn't give second chances. If you turn on this family, your death will be slow and painful enough that you'll beg for prison instead. Understood. David escorted him toward the exit, but before they reached the door, Vivian called out, Lucien! He turned back. She was still facing the monitors, not looking at him. I meant what I said about our son. Prove yourself and he'll know his father. But if you fail, she paused. He'll grow up knowing you died a coward who couldn't change when it mattered. The words hit harder than any threat. Lucien left the operations center, climbing back into the sedan with David and the security team. They drove in silence through dark streets while Lucien's mind processed everything. The hit squad, Sabrina's betrayal, Vincent's setup, and now this impossible assignment that was his only path to survival. Where are we going? He asked. Safe house. You'll stay there until the meeting with Delgado tomorrow. David pulled out a burner phone. Memorize this number. It's your direct line to our operations team. Use it only for emergencies. What counts as an emergency? If Delgado suspects you're working for us. If the FBI gets too close. If you're about to die. David's expression was flat. Anything else? Handle it yourself. The sedan pulled up to a brownstone in Queens residential neighborhood, quiet, forgettable. Top floor, David said. Food in the kitchen, weapons in the safe under the bed. Code is your son's due date, month, day, year, no spaces. Lucien frowned. How do you know his due date? Mrs. Moretti provided it. Said you'd need something to remind you why survival matters. The guards escorted Lucien inside and cleared the apartment before leaving him alone. The space was sparse but functional. Kitchen with basic supplies, bedroom with a single bed, living room with nothing except a couch and a window overlooking the street. Lucien found the safe under the bed, entering the code David had given him. It opened to reveal 2 handguns, ammunition, and a folder. He pulled out the folder. Inside were ultrasound photos of his son, the same ones Vivian had shown him earlier, but tucked between them was a handwritten note. His name will be Marcus, after your father. I haven't forgotten who you used to be. Prove that man still exists. Lucien stared at the note, something breaking inside his chest. She'd named their son after his father, the man who died when Lucien was 17, the man who'd worked construction his entire life and never complained, the man who'd taught Lucien that real strength meant protecting family, not destroying it. He'd forgotten those lessons somewhere along the path to power. Marcus. His son would carry that name, would grow up either knowing his father or knowing his father had failed. Lucien set the photos on the nightstand where he'd see them first thing in the morning. Then he checked the guns, loaded them, and prepared for tomorrow's meeting with Antonio Delgado. The meeting that would either save his life or end it. The restaurant was called Il Pescatore, tucked into a corner of Little Italy that still felt authentically connected to the old ways. Red checkered tablecloths, wine bottles as decoration, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce thick enough to taste. Lucien arrived 15 minutes early, as instructed. David had briefed him thoroughly. Delgado liked punctuality, valued respect, responded well to men who understood the old traditions even while operating in modern criminal enterprises. A hostess led Lucien to a private room in the back. Antonio Delgado sat alone at a table set for 4. He looked exactly like his photograph, distinguished, well-dressed, the kind of man who could pass for a legitimate businessman at any charity gala. But his eyes carried the coldness of someone who'd built an empire on human suffering. "Mr. Moretti," Delgado gestured to a chair, "Vincent spoke highly of you." Lucien sat, keeping his expression neutral. "I appreciate the meeting." "You've had some difficulties recently, I understand." "That's one way to describe it." Delgado poured wine from a bottle that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Tell me what happened. I want to hear your version." Lucien had rehearsed this part with David. The key was mixing truth with manipulation, making himself seem valuable but vulnerable. "I built an organization from nothing. Thought I was building an empire. Turns out, I was just operating someone else's infrastructure." He accepted the wine glass Delgado offered. "My wife's family owned everything. I didn't know until she decided to humiliate me publicly." "The party at the Blackthorn Grand. I heard about that." Delgado smiled slightly. "Quite dramatic. Destroyed my reputation overnight. Men who feared me last week now treat me like a joke." "And Vincent Calabrese offered you a partnership?" "Partnership is generous. He offered me a job checking manifests in his warehouse." Delgado's smile widened. "How did that feel? Going from boss to employee?" Lucien let real bitterness color his voice. "Like swallowing glass." "I imagine so." Delgado sipped his wine thoughtfully. "Vincent tells me you're looking for opportunities, real work, not charity positions designed to keep you grateful and controlled." "That's accurate." "What skills do you bring?" "I understand distribution networks. I know how to move product without attracting attention. I know which politicians can be bought and which ones are too dangerous to approach." Lucien leaned forward slightly. "And I know how to manage people. How to make them fear you just enough to stay loyal, but not enough to betray you. Those are useful skills, but I need more than competence. I need loyalty. You have my attention. Whether you have my loyalty depends on whether you actually offer what I need." Delgado's expression shifted. Most people probably kissed his ass immediately. Lucien's measured response seemed to intrigue him. "What do you need?" "Protection. Vincent is planning to have me killed. My wife's family withdrew support. The FBI is building a case against me based on evidence from a woman I trusted." Lucien met Delgado's eyes directly. "I need someone powerful enough to keep me alive while I rebuild. And in exchange, my expertise, my contacts, my operational knowledge, whatever you need from someone who spent 6 years running a successful organization." Delgado studied him for a long moment. "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect? Someone broken, desperate, begging for scraps?" Delgado refilled both wine glasses. "Instead, you're negotiating like you still have leverage." "I have skills you can use. That's leverage enough." The door opened. A woman entered, late 20s, beautiful in a calculated way that reminded Lucien uncomfortably of Sabrina. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than the average person earned in a month. "This is my daughter, Isabella," Delgado said. "She handles certain aspects of my business that require discretion." Isabella studied Lucien with cold evaluation. "You're the one Vincent recommended?" "That's me. Vincent also mentioned you might be a liability, that your wife destroyed you because you were stupid and arrogant." Lucien's jaw tightened. "Vincent has his own agenda, which is why I wanted to meet you myself." Isabella sat down, accepting wine from her father. "I've researched your background. Before your wife revealed the truth, you ran effective operations. Low heat from law enforcement, good profit margins, minimal personnel problems." "I knew what I was doing. Until you didn't." Isabella's smile was sharp. "Tell me, Mr. Moretti, what did you learn from your spectacular failure?" The question was a test. Lucien could feel it. "I learned that power you don't actually own can be taken away instantly. I learned that trusting the wrong person can destroy everything. And I learned that ego is expensive. He looked directly at Isabella. I won't make those mistakes again. She exchanged a glance with her father. We have an operation that requires someone with your skills, Delgado said. But it's sensitive. If you betray us, the consequences will be severe. Understood. I'm talking about your family, your wife, your unborn child. Delgado's voice remained pleasant, but the threat was crystal clear. Cross me, and everyone you care about dies screaming. Lucien felt ice in his veins. This was the monster Vivian wanted eliminated. The man who trafficked human beings and threatened children without hesitation. I have no family anymore, Lucien said carefully. My wife made sure of that. Good. Emotional attachments create vulnerabilities. Delgado stood. Isabella will brief you on the operation. Prove yourself useful, and we'll discuss long-term arrangements. He left the room. Isabella pulled out a tablet, bringing up shipping manifests and route maps. We move product through 12 major ports on the East Coast. Varela International owns infrastructure at 6 of them, which creates complications. What kind of complications? The Varela family claims to run legitimate operations. They don't want their property obviously connected to trafficking. So we have to be creative. Isabella zoomed in on one port location. This is where you come in. You know the Varela security protocols. You know how they monitor shipments. Lucien's mind raced. This was exactly what Vivian needed. Inside knowledge of how Delgado used Varela infrastructure. I know some protocols, but I never worked directly with the ports. You know enough, and you'll learn the rest. Isabella closed the tablet. There's a shipment arriving Tuesday night. High-value product that needs to move through quickly without documentation. You'll coordinate with our port contacts and make sure everything runs smoothly. What's the product? Isabella's smile was cold. Does it matter? Yes, it mattered. Because Lucien suspected he knew exactly what high-value product meant in Delgado's world. People. Just want to know what I'm handling, he said neutrally. You're handling whatever I tell you to handle. Isabella stood. Be at Pier 47 Tuesday night at 2 a.m. Bring work clothes and keep your mouth shut. My people will give you instructions. She left without another word. Lucien sat alone in the private dining room, staring at wine he couldn't taste anymore. He'd gotten inside Delgado's organization, exactly as planned. But actually seeing how trafficking operations worked, actually participating in the machinery that destroyed lives, was different than discussing it theoretically with David and Vivian. His phone buzzed. A text from the burner number. How did it go? Lucien typed back. I'm in. First assignment Tuesday night. The response came immediately. Good. Feed us details. We'll have a team ready. He pocketed the phone and stood up, leaving cash on the table even though Delgado would never let him pay. Outside, the early evening air felt thick and suffocating. Lucien walked 3 blocks before the black sedan appeared, David in the back seat. Get in! Lucien climbed inside. The car pulled into traffic smoothly. You did well, David said. Delgado bought the act. It wasn't entirely an act. Everything I said about being destroyed was true, which is what made it convincing. David pulled out a folder. This is everything we know about Tuesday's shipment. 26 people trafficked from Eastern Europe. Delgado's organization processes them through the port, then distributes them to various operations across the Northeast. Lucien looked at photographs of men, women, and children who'd been promised legitimate work and instead found themselves enslaved. We're stopping this shipment? No, we're documenting it, building evidence. One shipment isn't worth revealing your position. David's voice was cold, professional. We need Delgado's entire network mapped before we move. So these people just get trafficked? Yes. Lucien stared at the photographs. That's not acceptable. That's the assignment. You don't get to make ethical judgments about tactics. 26 people are unfortunate casualties in a larger operation. David took the folder back. Mrs. Moretti was very clear. You document everything. You feed us information. You do not compromise your position by playing hero. And if I refuse, then you've failed the assignment, and everything that follows is on you. The car stopped outside the Queen's safe house. Lucien got out, slamming the door harder than necessary. Inside the apartment, he stared at the ultrasound photos on the nightstand. Marcus, his son, who would grow up either knowing his father fought to become someone worth knowing, or knowing his father had been too weak to make the hard choices. But what did hard choices mean when 26 people were being fed into a trafficking network while you watched and took notes? Lucien pulled out the burner phone, staring at it. One call to the FBI could stop Tuesday's shipment, could save those people, could also destroy any chance of taking down Delgado's entire operation, could eliminate his only path to survival and protection, could ensure Marcus grew up never knowing his father except as a corpse or a prisoner. The phone felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Lucien set it down on the table, then picked it back up, then set it down again. Outside, the city moved through darkness, full of people making choices between survival and morality, between protecting themselves and protecting strangers, between becoming monsters or becoming prey. Lucien looked at his son's ultrasound one more time and realized that Vivian's assignment wasn't just about eliminating Delgado. It was about forcing Lucien to discover whether the man his father had raised still existed, or whether power had killed that man completely. Tuesday night was 48 hours away. 48 hours to decide who he wanted to be. And Lucien Moretti had absolutely no idea which choice would destroy him faster, saving those 26 people and losing everything, or letting them be trafficked and losing his soul. Tuesday night came too fast. Lucien stood in the darkness near Pier 47 at 1:45 a.m., wearing work clothes that smelled like diesel and salt water. The harbor stretched out black and infinite, broken only by cargo ship lights and the occasional flash of a security patrol. He hadn't slept in 2 days, hadn't eaten anything except coffee and whatever his stomach could hold down without revolting. The burner phone sat heavy in his jacket pocket. One call could stop this. One call to David, to Vivian's operation team, and they could intercept the shipment before it ever reached Delgado's distribution network. But then what? Delgado would know someone leaked the operation, would start hunting for the traitor, would eliminate anyone who seemed even remotely suspicious, and Lucien would be at the top of that list. His other option, the one that made his hands shake, was following orders, documenting everything, watching 26 human beings get processed like cargo while he took mental notes for Vivian's master plan. The man his father raised wouldn't have hesitated, would have called the authorities, damn the consequences, because some lines you didn't cross no matter what survival cost. But that man had died somewhere in the past 6 years, buried under designer suits and mistresses, and the intoxicating drug of being feared. Footsteps on the concrete pier. Lucien turned to see Isabella approaching with 3 men. She wore tactical black, hair pulled back, looking nothing like the elegant woman from the restaurant. This was her working uniform. This was who she really was. "You're early," she said. "Good." "You said 2 a.m. I said be here at 2 a.m. I didn't say the shipment arrives at 2 a.m. Isabella gestured to one of her men, who handed Lucien a radio. "You'll coordinate the ground team. Make sure the containers get from the ship to the trucks without anyone asking questions." "What about port security?" "Already handled. We have people inside." Isabella checked her watch. "The ship docks in 20 minutes. You have that long to familiarize yourself with the layout." She pulled out a tablet showing the pier from above, containers stacked like a maze, loading cranes positioned strategically, security camera, blind spots marked in red. 3 containers, Isabella continued. They're marked with blue customs tape. Standard shipping manifests say electronics. Reality is different. How many per container? 8 to 9 people, depending on size. They've been at sea for 11 days. Some won't make it off the ship alive. She said it like she was discussing inventory damage, acceptable losses. Lucien's jaw clenched. What happens to the ones who survive? Isabella looked at him with cold amusement. Why do you care? I don't. Just want to know the process. The process is none of your concern. You move containers from point A to point B. That's the job. She handed him work gloves. Questions? About 1,000, but none he could ask without revealing himself. No questions. Good. Stay on radio channel 3. Any problems, you report directly to me. Isabella turned to leave, then paused. And Lucien? Don't develop a conscience tonight. We're not in the business of mercy. She disappeared into the shadows with her security team. Lucien stood alone near a stack of containers, the weight of what was about to happen pressing down like a physical force. His phone buzzed. A text from David on the burner. Status? Lucian typed back. Shipment arriving in 15 minutes. 3 containers. Blue customs tape. 24 to 27 people total. Document everything. Do not interfere. Orders from Mrs. Moretti. Lucian stared at that message. Do not interfere. Let it happen. Watch human beings get trafficked so the bigger operation could proceed. He pocketed the phone and moved to the position Isabella had indicated, a vantage point near the crane operator's station where he could oversee the entire transfer. The container ship appeared on the horizon, lights cutting through fog rolling off the water, massive, commercial, legitimate in every visible way. Lucien's radio crackled to life. Ground team, this is Control. Ship is docking. All personnel to positions. Men emerged from various hiding spots around the pier, 8 of them, dressed like normal dock workers. They moved with practiced efficiency toward the ship's mooring point. The vessel settled against the pier with a groan of metal and wood. Deck crew began the process of unlocking containers, while a crane operator, one of Delgado's people, positioned his equipment. Isabella's voice came through the radio. Moretti, you're up. Get those containers moving. Lucian keyed his radio. Copy. He approached the dock workers, showing them the tablet with the marked containers. They nodded and began the choreographed process of unhooking the blue-taped units from the ship's cargo hold. The first container swung through the air on crane cables, rotating slightly before settling onto a flatbed truck. The driver didn't wait for confirmation, just engaged the engine and drove toward the pier exit, one down. The second container followed the same pattern, smooth, professional, like they'd done this 100 times before, which they probably had. Lucian's hands were shaking. He shoved them in his pockets so nobody would notice. The third container was being positioned when something went wrong. A man stumbled out from behind a stack of cargo. Thin, desperate, wearing clothes that marked him as Eastern European. He must have escaped from one of the earlier containers during the ship's voyage. Been hiding, waiting for any chance at freedom. He ran toward the pier gate, screaming in a language Lucian didn't understand. 2 of Delgado's dock workers moved to intercept him. The man fought, wildly, desperately, throwing punches that had no technique behind them, just raw survival instinct. One of the workers pulled a knife. Stop! Lucian's voice cut through the night before he could stop himself. Everyone froze. Isabella's voice crackled over the radio. Moretti, what the hell are you doing? Lucian walked toward the struggle, his mind racing for an explanation that wouldn't blow his cover. You kill him here, port security responds. Blood on the concrete means questions we can't answer. The worker with the knife looked uncertain. Bring him to the truck, Lucian ordered. We'll handle it away from the cameras. Isabella's voice again, sharper. Since when do you give orders? Since you put me in charge of ground operations. You want this done clean, or you want it messy? Silence on the radio. Then, do it your way. But if this creates problems, you answer for it. The workers grabbed the escaped man, zip-tying his hands and dragging him toward the third truck. He was still screaming, still fighting, but losing energy fast. Lucian followed them to the truck, his heart hammering against his ribs. The third container was already loaded. The driver looked at Lucian expectantly. Put him inside, Lucian said. They opened the container doors. The smell hit immediately. Human waste, fear, bodies packed too close together in a metal box that had crossed the Atlantic without ventilation or sanitation. People stared out from the darkness. Men, women, teenagers. Their eyes were hollow, defeated. They'd stopped screaming days ago. The workers threw the escaped man inside and slammed the doors shut again. Lucien stood there as the truck drove away, feeling like he'd just participated in something that couldn't be undone. Isabella appeared beside him. Quick thinking with the cameras. Just being practical. That man you saved from getting stabbed? He'll wish we'd killed him here. Isabella lit a cigarette, watching the truck disappear. Where he's going is worse than death. Where is that? You don't need to know. She exhaled smoke. Your job tonight was moving containers. You did that. Well enough that my father wants to talk to you about permanent arrangements. When? Now. He's waiting at the processing facility. Lucien's stomach dropped. I thought I was just handling the pier transfer. That was your audition. This is the real job interview. Isabella gestured toward a black SUV. Get in. Every instinct screamed to run, to grab the burner phone and call David, to abort the entire operation before he got buried so deep he'd never surface. But running meant exposing himself, meant losing the only protection keeping him alive, meant never seeing Marcus. Lucian climbed into the SUV. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving the harbor district and heading into industrial wasteland on the city's edge. Abandoned factories, vacant lots, the kind of place where screams wouldn't attract attention. The SUV pulled up to a warehouse that looked condemned from the outside. Broken windows, graffiti-covered walls, no visible security, but inside was a different world. The space had been converted into a processing center. Medical stations, registration desks, holding cells. Everything needed to evaluate, categorize, and distribute human cargo. And in the center of it all, supervising the operation with casual cruelty, stood Antonio Delgado. He looked up when Lucian entered. "Ah, our newest recruit. Isabella tells me you handled the peer transfer smoothly. No major problems. I heard about the escapee. Quick thinking, avoiding bloodshed near the cameras." Delgado walked toward him, studying Lucien's face. "Tell me something honestly. How does this make you feel?" It was another test. Lucien could sense it. "Like business," he said carefully. "Uncomfortable business, but business nonetheless." "You're lying," Delgado smiled. "I can see it in your eyes. This disgusts you. No point denying it. I've done a lot of things. Extortion, violence, corruption, but I never trafficked people. Yet here you are. Here I am." Delgado gestured around the warehouse. "You know what separates successful criminals from failures? Willingness to cross lines others won't cross. Your wife's family understands that. They profit from my operations while pretending their hands are clean." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm deciding whether to trust you or kill you." Delgado's voice remained pleasant. "Isabella thinks you're useful. Vincent thinks you're a liability. I'm undecided. What would convince you?" Delgado walked to one of the holding cells. Inside, the escaped man from the pier sat huddled against the wall, zip ties cutting into his wrist. "He caused problems tonight," Delgado said. "Delayed the operation, created risk. In my organization, problems get solved permanently." He pulled a pistol from his jacket and offered it to Lucian. "Solve this problem." The warehouse went silent. Lucian stared at the gun. This was the moment. The point of no return beyond all previous points of no return. Kill an innocent man to prove loyalty to a monster, or refuse and die right here. "He's unarmed," Lucian said. "Not a threat anymore." "That's not what I asked." Delgado pressed the gun into Lucian's hand. "I asked you to solve a problem. Either you understand how my organization works, or you don't belong in it." Isabella watched from across the warehouse, her expression unreadable. The other workers had stopped what they were doing, sensing the test happening in real time. Lucien looked at the man in the cell, young, maybe 25, terrified but trying to hold on to some shred of dignity. He'd crossed an ocean hoping for a better life. Instead found himself in a cage waiting to be executed by a stranger. Lucien's hand closed around the pistol grip. His father's voice echoed in his memory. Real strength means protecting people who can't protect themselves. But his father was dead, had been dead for years, and his ideals had died with him in a world that rewarded predators and punished heroes. Lucien raised the gun. The man in the cell started praying in his language. Words Lucien didn't understand but recognized anyway, desperate pleas to forces that weren't listening. "Do it," Delgado said quietly. Lucien's finger moved to the trigger. His hands were steady now, no shaking, just cold calculation about survival and consequences and whether saving one stranger was worth sacrificing his son's future. The gun felt like it weighed nothing, and everything. He turned the barrel toward Delgado's face. The warehouse exploded into motion. Workers reached for weapons. Isabella shouted something. Delgado's expression shifted from amusement to genuine surprise. "You're making a mistake," Delgado said calmly. "Probably." Lucien's voice came out flat. "But I've made worse." He pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked on an empty chamber. Delgado laughed. "You think I'd hand you a loaded weapon before knowing if you'd actually use it?" He pulled his own pistol, this one very loaded, and pressed it against Lucien's forehead. "Congratulations. You failed the test." Lucien didn't move, didn't flinch, just stared at Delgado with something that felt like relief mixed with resignation. Killing me creates problems with the Varela family. The Varela family will understand that traitors get what they deserve. Delgado's finger tightened on the trigger. Any last words?
Yeah. Lucian met his eyes. You're about to have a really bad night. Delgado frowned. What? The warehouse's main door exploded inward. Federal agents poured through the opening like a tidal wave, tactical gear and assault rifles, and voices screaming commands that overlapped into chaos. FBI! On the ground! Hands where we can see them! Delgado spun toward the entrance, his gun still pressed against Lucien's skull. Isabella was already running toward a back exit, her security team providing covering fire that sparked off concrete and metal. Workers scattered in every direction, some surrendering immediately, hands raised, others fighting back with whatever weapons they could grab. The holding cells erupted with prisoners screaming in multiple languages, sensing their captor's moment of distraction. And in the center of the storm, Delgado pressed the gun harder against Lucien's forehead. You set this up. You're working with them. No. Lucien's voice was steady, despite the barrel grinding against his skull. I'm working with someone worse. The back wall of the warehouse exploded. Not FBI, not police, Varela security forces, heavily armed and moving with military precision. They swept through the chaos like professionals, eliminating Delgado's guards with suppressed weapons and coordinated tactics. David Chen appeared through the smoke, flanked by operators in tactical gear. Mr. Delgado, David called out, lower your weapon. You're surrounded. By who? The Varela family? Delgado laughed bitterly. They've been profiting from my operations for years. They're not going to kill their cash flow. You're wrong. A new voice cut through the warehouse. Vivian stepped through the shattered back wall, pregnant and composed, wearing body armor over business clothes like it was the most natural thing in the world. Delgado's expression shifted to genuine shock. Mrs. Moretti, what are you doing here? Ending a liability. Vivian walked closer, surrounded by her security team. You threatened my family, Antonio. Used our infrastructure to move your product. And worst of all, you kept evidence of our involvement. Which means killing me releases that evidence. No. It means we already found your evidence cache and destroyed it. Vivian gestured to one of her security team members who held up a hard drive. Your insurance policy just became worthless. Delgado's face went pale. That's impossible. Nobody knew where… Lucien told us. Vivian's eyes moved to where her ex-husband stood with a gun against his head. He's been feeding us information since his first meeting with you. Every location, every operation, every dirty secret. The betrayal hit Delgado like a physical blow. He looked at Lucien with pure hatred. You've been working for her this entire time? Not the entire time. Lucien's voice was quiet. Just since she gave me a choice between helping her or dying alone. Delgado's finger tightened on the trigger. Then you'll die with me. No. Vivian raised her hand slightly. A single suppressed gunshot. Delgado's head snapped back, a precise hole appearing in his temple. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. Lucien stumbled backward as the body collapsed, Delgado's pistol clattering across the concrete floor. The warehouse fell silent except for FBI agents securing prisoners and Varela security forces eliminating the last of Delgado's resistance. Vivian walked to Lucien, her expression unreadable. Are you hurt? He shook his head. How did you know when to move? You sent the signal when you turned the gun on Delgado instead of executing that prisoner. Vivian glanced at the holding cell where the young man still sat, now surrounded by federal agents offering water and medical attention. That's when I knew you'd remember who you used to be. I almost didn't. I know. That's why I was ready to burn this entire operation and extract you if you pulled that trigger. Vivian's hand moved to her pregnant belly. I needed to know if the man I married still existed, if he was worth saving. And? You're standing here instead of lying dead next to Delgado. That's your answer. Federal agents were leading prisoners out of the warehouse now, not the trafficked victims, but Delgado's workers and associates, building cases, gathering evidence. Isabella Delgado was dragged past in handcuffs, blood running from a wound on her shoulder. She looked at Lucien with pure venom. You destroyed everything my father built. Your father built it on slavery, Lucian said. It deserved to be destroyed. An FBI agent that Lucian suddenly recognized stepped forward. Sabrina.
She wore a tactical vest over FBI gear, her beautiful face harder than he remembered. The woman who'd shared his bed and documented his crimes now looked at him like a stranger. "Mr. Moretti," she said formally, "we need your statement about tonight's operation." "I'm not saying anything without a lawyer." "You're not under arrest. You're a cooperating witness." Sabrina pulled out a folder. "Mrs. Moretti's attorneys worked out an immunity agreement in exchange for your testimony against the Delgado organization." Lucian looked at Vivian. "You planned this from the beginning." "I planned for multiple outcomes. This one happened to work in your favor." Vivian turned to David. "Get him somewhere safe. We'll debrief in the morning."
"Wait." Lucian grabbed her arm gently. "The people in those containers, the victims, what happens to them?" "They'll be processed by federal authorities, given medical care, legal representation, and asylum claims." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "They're not going into Delgado's network. You saved them when you refused to let that operation proceed quietly." "I didn't call it in. You did. Because you sent enough information for us to act. Because you chose documentation over participation." Vivian pulled her arm free. "You made the right choice, Lucian. Finally." She walked away, her security team surrounding her protectively. David guided Lucian toward an exit, away from FBI agents and crime scene investigators and the human wreckage of Delgado's collapsed empire. Outside, dawn was breaking over the industrial wasteland. Lucian stood in the gray light, breathing air that tasted like smoke and salt water, and something that might have been freedom. "What now?" he asked. "Now you testify. Help federal prosecutors build cases against everyone in Delgado's network." David opened the door to a waiting sedan. "And then, if you're very lucky, Mrs. Moretti allows you to be part of your son's life." "She said that?" "She said you'd earned the chance to prove yourself further. That's not the same as guarantee." David's expression remained neutral. "You saved those people tonight, Lucien, but you also participated in their trafficking up to the moment you finally drew a line. That's not heroism. That's just choosing to stop being a monster slightly earlier than you could have." The words stung because they were true. Lucian had watched containers full of human beings get loaded onto trucks, had helped coordinate their transfer, had almost executed an unarmed prisoner to prove loyalty to a trafficker. The fact that he'd stopped short of the worst crimes didn't erase his participation in the ones that came before. "Get in the car," David said. "Long day ahead." Lucian climbed into the sedan, exhausted beyond anything sleep could fix. The driver pulled away from the warehouse as emergency vehicles arrived. Ambulances for the trafficked victims, coroner vans for Delgado's body, federal trucks to process evidence. Lucien's phone buzzed. Not the burner. His actual phone. A text from an unknown number. "You made the right choice. Maybe there's hope for you after all. V." He stared at that message for a long time. Hope. Such a small word for such an impossible concept. 6 months ago, he'd been a mafia boss commanding fear and respect, sleeping with a beautiful mistress in a penthouse he thought he owned, living a life of luxury built on lies. Now he was a federal witness who just helped dismantle a trafficking network while working for his ex-wife's family, hoping to earn supervised visits with a son who wasn't born yet. The fall from the top had been brutal. But somewhere in the wreckage, Lucien Moretti had found something he'd lost years ago. A line he wouldn't cross, a choice he wouldn't make, a piece of his father's teachings that ego and power hadn't completely destroyed. It wasn't redemption. Not yet. But it was a start. The sedan drove through morning traffic while Lucian watched the city wake up, coffee shops opening, people heading to work, normal lives proceeding without any knowledge of the warehouse battle that had just ended a trafficking empire. His phone buzzed again, this time a photo. Vivian in a hospital gown, looking exhausted but smiling slightly. And in her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, a tiny face with features that looked impossibly familiar. Marcus. Born early, healthy, perfect. The text below the photo. He arrived 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Impatient, like his father. You can meet him tomorrow if you want. No promises beyond that. Lucian's hands shook as he stared at his son's face. Everything he'd lost, everything he'd destroyed, everything he'd sacrificed, all of it had led to this moment. A chance, not a guarantee, just a chance to be the father Marcus deserved instead of the man Lucian had become. He texted back, "I'll be there. Thank you." The response came immediately. "Don't thank me yet. Prove you mean it." Outside the car window, the sun finally broke through clouds, casting long shadows across the city, where Lucien Moretti had once ruled as a king and now existed as something much smaller but possibly more real. A man trying to rebuild, a father trying to earn the title, a broken soul discovering that sometimes the only way forward is through the wreckage of everything you thought you were. The sedan kept driving toward whatever came next, and for the first time in years, Lucien Moretti faced the future not with arrogance or fear, but with something that felt dangerously close to hope. The hospital room smelled like antiseptic and new beginnings. Lucian stood outside the door for 5 full minutes before finding the courage to knock. His hand hovered in the air, trembling slightly, while nurses moved past him in the corridor and machines beeped their mechanical rhythms from other rooms where life was being saved or lost. He'd faced down armed killers, survived assassination attempts, stared into Antonio Delgado's eyes while a gun pressed against his forehead. But knocking on this door felt more terrifying than any of it. Finally, his knuckles connected with wood. "Come in," Vivian's voice, tired but steady. Lucian pushed the door open slowly. The room was private, expensive, filled with flowers from people Lucian didn't know. Vivian's real world, the one that existed beyond his understanding. She sat propped against pillows, still wearing the hospital gown, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The pregnancy weight had already started to fade from her face, leaving her looking exhausted, but somehow more herself than he'd seen in years. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, Marcus slept with tiny fists curled against his chest. Lucian's breath caught. "You can come closer," Vivian said quietly. "He won't break." Lucian crossed the room like he was walking through a minefield. Each step felt weighted with every mistake he'd ever made, every lie he'd told, every moment he'd chosen power over the woman now watching him with cautious eyes. He stopped at the edge of the bed, staring down at his son. Marcus had Vivian's nose, Lucian's dark hair, a face so perfect and unmarked by the world that it hurt to look at. "He's beautiful," Lucian whispered. "He is." Vivian adjusted the blanket slightly. "Born at 4:47 this morning, 6 pounds, 8 ounces. Healthy despite arriving early. Were you alone?" "My father was here. David Chen. A few people from the company." Vivian's voice remained neutral. "The people who actually show up." The words landed like a blade between his ribs. "I would have been here if I'd known." "You were busy helping dismantle a trafficking network. That's more important than watching me give birth." Vivian looked up at him. "I'm not being sarcastic. You made the right choice last night, actually being where you were needed instead of where you wanted to be." Lucian pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down heavily. "Can I hold him?" Vivian hesitated, long enough that Lucien thought she might refuse. Then she carefully transferred the sleeping infant into his arms. Marcus weighed almost nothing, felt impossibly fragile. His tiny chest rose and fell with breaths that seemed too delicate to sustain life. Lucian stared at his son and felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been sealed shut for years under layers of ego and ambition and the corrosive poison of believing himself untouchable. "I don't know how to do this," he said quietly. "Nobody does. You just figure it out." Vivian watched him holding Marcus with an expression Lucian couldn't read. "The question is whether you'll actually be around to figure it out, or whether this is just another performance." "It's not a performance." "We'll see." Vivian leaned back against the pillows, wincing slightly. "The federal prosecutors want to meet with you tomorrow. They're building cases against 43 people connected to Delgado's network. Your testimony will be crucial. I'll tell them everything I know. You better. Because that immunity agreement has conditions. If you lie, if you withhold information, if you try to protect anyone involved in trafficking operations, the deal evaporates and you face charges for everything Sabrina documented, plus everything from last night." Lucien looked up from Marcus's sleeping face. "I'm not protecting anyone. That entire organization deserves to burn." "Good." Vivian's hand moved to her stomach, which was still swollen from pregnancy. There's something else you need to know. What? Vincent Calabrese is dead. The words hung in the air like smoke. What happened? Car accident, very tragic. His vehicle went off a bridge around 3 a.m. this morning. Vivian's tone suggested the accident had been anything but accidental. Federal investigators are looking into possible connections to the Delgado operation, but so far nothing conclusive. Lucien understood immediately. The Varela family had eliminated Vincent, tied up loose ends, made sure nobody who'd tried to have Lucien killed survived to cause future problems. Did you order that? He asked. I don't order anything. My father handles security matters. Vivian met his eyes. But I won't pretend to mourn Vincent. He tried to have you murdered. In my family, that's not something we forgive. Even though you hate me? I don't hate you, Lucien. Vivian's voice softened slightly. I hate what you became. But Marcus deserves to know his father if his father is willing to be someone worth knowing. Marcus stirred in Lucien's arms, making a small sound before settling back into sleep. I want to be that person, Lucien said. I just don't know if I can. Then you'll fail. And Marcus will grow up with a father who couldn't change when it mattered. Vivian's eyes glistened slightly. Or you'll succeed. And maybe, in 10 or 15 years, he'll look back and see a man who fought to become better instead of staying broken. A nurse knocked and entered, checking monitors and making notes on a tablet. Visiting hours end in 20 minutes, she said kindly. Mom needs rest. Lucien carefully transferred Marcus back to Vivian's arms. The loss of that tiny weight felt like losing something irreplaceable. Can I come back tomorrow? He asked. After your federal deposition, David will arrange security transport. Vivian adjusted Marcus against her shoulder. And Lucien? Don't bring gifts. Don't try to buy your way into his life with expensive presents. Just show up, consistently. That's all I'm asking. I'll be here. We'll see. Lucien stood, looking down at his son one more time before forcing himself to walk toward the door. Lucien. He turned back. Vivian was watching him with an expression that carried traces of the woman he'd married 6 years ago, the one who'd loved him before power corrupted everything. Thank you, she said quietly, for not pulling that trigger last night, for choosing to be someone Marcus won't be ashamed to know. I almost didn't, but you did. That's what matters. Lucien left the hospital room, closing the door gently behind him. In the hallway, David Chen waited with 2 Varela security personnel. How'd it go? David asked. I held my son. Lucien's voice came out rough. That's more than I deserved. Probably, David gestured toward the elevator. We need to move. Federal prosecutors want you in protective custody until the depositions are complete. Too many people from Delgado's network still out there who might want revenge. They took the elevator down to an underground parking level where a convoy of black SUVs waited. Military-grade security for a man who'd once commanded his own empire and now existed under someone else's protection. The ride to the safe house took 40 minutes through traffic that felt surreal in its normalcy. People going to work, living ordinary lives. Not knowing that last night, a trafficking network had been destroyed and today, the survivors were giving testimony that would ripple through the criminal underworld for years. The safe house was a brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, expensive enough to blend in, secured enough to repel attacks. Armed guards at every entrance, surveillance cameras covering every angle. Inside, federal prosecutors had set up a conference room with recording equipment and stacks of files. Special Agent Sarah Mitchell, the lead prosecutor on the Delgado case, sat waiting with 2 colleagues and a court stenographer. Mr. Moretti, she gestured to a chair. Thank you for your cooperation. Lucien sat down across from her. Let's get this over with. We'll be here for several hours, possibly days. We need every detail about Delgado's operation, names, locations, distribution networks, financial structures, political connections. Mitchell opened a file. And we need to know everything about Sabrina Vale's undercover work with your former organization. That name still felt like swallowing glass. What do you want to know? Start at the beginning. When did you first meet Sabrina? Lucien took a breath and began talking. He talked for 6 hours straight that first day, describing how Sabrina had appeared at one of his clubs 18 months ago. Beautiful, charming,
seemingly fascinated by the dangerous world he inhabited. How she'd played the role perfectly, making him feel powerful and desired while documenting every illegal conversation, every financial transaction, every piece of evidence the FBI would later use to build their case. "Did you ever suspect she was law enforcement?" Mitchell asked.
No. I had her background checked. Everything looked clean. That's because her cover was created by professionals. Full identity, financial history, social media presence going back years. Mitchell showed him files detailing the FBI's elaborate operation. They invested significant resources into building Sabrina's legend. Why me? I wasn't the biggest fish.
You were connected to multiple criminal organizations. Dating you gave Agent Vale access to people the FBI had been trying to infiltrate for years. Mitchell pulled out surveillance photos showing Sabrina at various meetings, parties, and private gatherings where criminal business was discussed. She documented everything, built cases against 73 individuals across 6 different families. Lucien stared at photos of himself laughing with Sabrina, buying her gifts, introducing her to people who trusted him. Every moment had been a lie, every smile calculated, every kiss strategic. "Does she know about last night?" he asked. "About me working with the Varela family? Agent Vale was part of the tactical team that raided Delgado's warehouse. She's been debriefed on your role." Mitchell's expression remained neutral. "She requested that I tell you she holds no personal animosity. It was an assignment. Nothing more." "Nothing more," Lucien laughed bitterly. "I gave her millions of dollars, told her things I never told anyone, planned a future that never existed. That's the nature of undercover work, Mr. Moretti. It's manipulation at the highest level." Mitchell closed that file and opened another. "Let's talk about Antonio Delgado." The deposition continued for 3 more days. Lucien described every meeting, every conversation, every detail of the trafficking operation he'd witnessed. The prosecutors built timelines, connected names to crimes, assembled evidence that would put dozens of people in federal prison for decades. And through it all, Lucien felt pieces of his old life dying. The man who'd been a mafia boss, who'd commanded fear and respect, who'd believed himself untouchable. That man was gone, buried under testimony and evidence and the weight of consequences he could no longer avoid. On the 4th day, Mitchell finally closed her files. "That's everything we need for now. We'll likely call you to testify when the trials begin, but for now you're free to go."
"Free?" Lucien almost laughed. "I'm a federal witness under Varela family protection. I'm not free, I'm just alive." "That's more than a lot of people in your former position can say." Mitchell stood, extending her hand. "For what it's worth, what you did at that warehouse, refusing to execute that prisoner, took courage. Not many people in your situation would have made that choice." Lucien shook her hand. "I almost didn't." "But you did. Remember that when you're questioning whether you can change?" David was waiting outside the conference room. "Done?" he asked. "For now." "Good. Mrs. Moretti wants to see you." They drove back to the hospital. Visiting hours were nearly over, but Varela Security had arranged special access. Vivian was sitting up in bed when Lucien entered, looking stronger than she had days earlier. Marcus slept in a bassinet beside her. "How'd the deposition go?" she asked. "Painful. Necessary." Lucien pulled the chair closer. "They have everything they need to dismantle what's left of Delgado's network. And you survived reliving all your mistakes. Impressive." Vivian gestured toward Marcus. "He's been asking for you." "He can't talk yet." "I know, but he gets fussy when it's just me, settles down when there's a deeper voice in the room." She smiled slightly. "Apparently he recognizes his father, even if his father is still figuring out how to be one." Lucien looked at his sleeping son. "Can I hold him?" "You don't have to ask permission every time. He's your son, too." Lucien carefully lifted Marcus from the bassinet. The infant stirred but didn't wake, settling against Lucien's chest like he belonged there. "There's something we need to discuss," Vivian said. "About the future." "I'm listening." "My father is offering you a legitimate position within Varela International. Not a cover story this time. Real work. Corporate security consulting, using your understanding of criminal operations to protect our legitimate businesses. What's the catch? You'll be monitored, closely, for at least 2 years. Any hint that you're reverting to old patterns, any suggestion that you're using company resources for illegal activities, and you're out. Permanently."
Lucien adjusted Marcus in his arms. And if I succeed, if I actually do the job properly, then maybe after those 2 years, we revisit custody arrangements. Maybe supervised visitation becomes real co-parenting. Maybe Marcus gets to know his father without guards standing in the room. What about us? Lucien asked quietly. Is there any chance? No? Vivian's voice was firm, but not cruel. That door is closed. I meant what I said at the party. You destroyed what we had. I've mourned it, moved on. The only relationship we'll have is as Marcus's parents. I understand. Do you? Because you need to actually understand it, not just say you do. Vivian leaned forward. I'm not punishing you by refusing to reconcile. I'm protecting myself. You taught me that loving someone who values power over loyalty is a path to destruction. I won't walk that path again. Marcus stirred in Lucien's arms, his tiny face scrunching up before relaxing again. He deserves better than the man I became, Lucien said. Yes. So become better. Vivian's eyes held his. Not for me. Not even for him, really. For yourself. Because the alternative is dying as the same broken man you were 6 months ago. A nurse entered, checking monitors and preparing medications. Visiting hours are over in 5 minutes, she announced gently. Lucien stood, carefully placing Marcus back in the bassinet, his son's tiny hand wrapped around Lucien's finger for a moment before releasing. I'll be back tomorrow, he said to Vivian. I'm being discharged tomorrow. We're going to my new apartment. She pulled out her phone, typing an address and sending it to him. You can visit Marcus there, same rules, show up consistently. No expensive gifts. Just be present. I will. Prove it. Lucien left the hospital as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of endings and beginnings bleeding together. David drove him to a different safe house. This one a small apartment that would serve as Lucien's home until the trials ended and federal protection was no longer necessary. This is your life now, David said, handing him keys. Quiet, controlled, nothing like what you had before. Good. What I had before almost destroyed everyone around me. David studied him for a moment. Mrs. Moretti believes you can change. I'm less convinced, but I hope she's right, for Marcus's sake. So do I. Lucien entered the apartment alone. 1 bedroom, small kitchen, living room with a window overlooking a tree-lined street where normal people lived normal lives. He'd once ruled from a penthouse overlooking the entire city, had commanded an empire built on violence and corruption, had believed himself a king. Now he lived in a studio apartment under federal protection, hoping to earn supervised visits with a son who didn't know him yet. The fall should have felt humiliating. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing Lucien had experienced in years. Busk. 6 months passed. Lucien showed up at Vivian's apartment every Tuesday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Never late. Never missing a visit, just appearing consistently like he'd promised. At first, Vivian watched him like a hawk, monitoring every interaction, ready to end the visits if he showed any signs of the man he'd been. But slowly, over weeks that became months, she began to relax. Lucien learned how to change diapers, how to warm bottles to the right temperature, how to hold Marcus during midnight crying sessions so Vivian could sleep. He learned what fatherhood actually meant, not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but showing up exhausted after work and still finding energy to rock his son to sleep, cleaning spit up off his shirt without complaining, singing terrible lullabies that somehow worked anyway. The federal trials began in the 7th month. Lucien testified against 43 defendants connected to Delgado's trafficking network. Faced hostile cross-examination from defense attorneys trying to discredit him as a criminal turned informant. Sat in witness boxes while families of the accused stared at him with hatred. But he told the truth. All of it. Every ugly detail about operations he'd witnessed, conversations he'd overheard, crimes he'd helped document. The convictions came steadily. Delgado's lieutenants, distribution network operators, the corrupt officials who'd enabled the trafficking. Isabella Delgado herself, sentenced to 40 years without parole. And through it all, Lucien returned to that small apartment every night, staring at photos of Marcus that Vivian texted him throughout the day, learning what it meant to have something worth being better for. The morning after the final conviction, Vivian called him. Can you come over? We need to talk. Lucien's stomach dropped. Those words never meant anything good. He arrived at her apartment 20 minutes later, his mind racing through possibilities. Had he done something wrong? Violated some unspoken rule? Was she ending the visitation arrangement? Vivian opened the door holding Marcus, who was now 8 months old and starting to pull himself up on furniture. "Come in." Lucien entered cautiously. The apartment smelled like coffee and baby powder. Vivian set Marcus down in his playpen, where he immediately started banging toys together with the concentration of someone discovering physics for the first time. "Sit," Vivian said. Lucien sat on the couch, his hands gripping his knees. Vivian handed him a folder. "What's this?" "New custody arrangement. My lawyers drew it up based on the past 6 months." Lucien opened the folder slowly. "Joint custody, 50-50 time split. Legal decision-making authority shared equally." He stared at the documents like they might disappear. "You're serious? You've shown up every single week, learned how to be a father, testified against some of the most dangerous people in the city despite the risks." Vivian sat down across from him. "You've proven you can change. That deserves to be rewarded." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep showing up, keep being the man Marcus deserves instead of the man you were." "I will. I promise." "Don't promise. Just do it." Vivian's expression softened slightly. "You're a good father, Lucien. I never thought I'd say that 6 months ago, but it's true. Marcus lights up when you walk in the room. He trusts you. That's not something you can fake." Marcus crawled toward Lucien, pulling himself up using the couch, and reaching his arms up in the universal toddler signal for "pick me up." Lucien lifted his son, who immediately grabbed his face with sticky hands and laughed. "Da-da!" Marcus said clearly. Both adults froze. "Did he just—" Lucien's voice cracked. "First word." Vivian smiled genuinely for the first time in months. "Of course it's da-da. He's been practicing all week." Marcus repeated it, delighted with himself. "Da-da, da-da." Lucien held his son close, feeling something break open in his chest that had been locked away for years. Not power, not ego, not the hollow satisfaction of being feared, just love. Simple and overwhelming and more terrifying than any danger he'd ever faced. "I've got him this weekend," Vivian said, checking the custody schedule. "But next weekend is yours, Friday evening through Sunday night." "My apartment isn't really set up for a baby." "Then make it ready. You have a week." Vivian stood. "And Lucien? Thank you." "For what?" "For proving me wrong about whether people can change. I didn't think you could. I'm glad I was wrong." Once, 2 years after the night at Blackthorn Grand Hotel, Lucien Moretti stood in a playground watching his son navigate a jungle gym with the fearless determination of a toddler who hadn't learned the meaning of danger yet. "Careful, Marcus," he called out. "Hold on tight." Marcus waved dismissively and kept climbing. Vivian sat on the bench beside Lucien, sipping coffee and watching their son with the eternal vigilance of mothers everywhere. "He gets his stubbornness from you," she said. "Pretty sure that's your genetic contribution." She smiled. "Maybe both." They sat in comfortable silence while Marcus played with other children whose parents probably had normal jobs and normal lives and had never dismantled trafficking networks or testified in federal court. "How's work?" Vivian asked. "Busy. Your father has me consulting on security for the new hotel development in Miami. Apparently there are some local organizations trying to muscle in on the construction contracts. Can you handle it without reverting to old methods?" "I haven't broken anyone's legs in 2 years. I think I've earned some trust." Vivian laughed, actually laughed. "Fair point." Marcus ran over, demanding to be pushed on the swings. Lucien stood, following his son to the swing set and lifting him into the seat. "Higher," Marcus demanded. "You're already pretty high, buddy." "Higher!" Lucien pushed the swing gently, watching Marcus laugh with pure joy at the simple pleasure of movement and wind and his father's attention. This was his life now. Playground visits, bedtime stories, negotiating with a toddler about vegetable consumption, corporate security consulting that paid well but carried none of the dangerous glamour of his former existence. It should have felt small, diminished, like settling for less. Instead, it felt like the first real thing Lucien had built that actually belonged to him. Not borrowed power from Vivian's family, not an empire constructed on violence and corruption, just a relationship with his son, earned through consistency and showing up and choosing to be better instead of staying broken. "Daddy, watch this." Marcus tried to jump off the swing mid-motion. Lucien caught him before he could injure himself. "What did we say about jumping from high places?"
"Don't do it unless Mama's watching. Don't do it at all." Marcus giggled and ran toward the slide. Vivian joined Lucien near the swing set. "He's going to give us both gray hair before kindergarten." "Probably." Lucien watched Marcus climb the slide ladder. "Can I ask you something?" "What?" "Do you ever regret it? Exposing me at that party? Destroying my empire?" Vivian considered the question seriously. "No. You needed to be destroyed. The man you'd become was poisonous to yourself, to me, to everyone around you." "What about now, the man I am now?" She looked at him for a long moment. "The man you are now is someone I can trust with our son. Someone who shows up. Someone who chose to change instead of dying as the same broken person you were." "That's not the same as forgiving me." "No, it's not." Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. "I've made peace with what happened. I don't carry anger anymore. But forgiveness implies we might go back to what we had, and that's not possible. Too much damage, too many lies." "I know. But I respect you. As Marcus's father, as someone who fought to become better. That's more than I ever expected to feel about you again." Marcus ran over, covered in wood chips and playground dirt. "I'm hungry. We brought snacks." Vivian pulled out containers from her bag. They sat on the bench while Marcus demolished apple slices and crackers with the efficiency of someone who'd just burned thousands of toddler calories. "Dad, are you coming to my birthday party?" Marcus asked through a mouthful of food. "Wouldn't miss it. It's at Mama's house, with cake and balloons and presents." "I know, I helped plan it." Marcus looked satisfied with this answer and returned to demolishing his snacks. Vivian glanced at Lucien. "Thank you for that, by the way. Co-planning instead of trying to outdo each other with gifts. I learned my lesson about trying to buy affection." The afternoon sun painted everything in golden light, while other families played around them, creating a scene of normalcy that Lucien had never imagined for himself. His phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. "Need to talk about the Miami situation. Some complications." "Work?" Vivian asked. "Always is." Lucien stood, ruffling Marcus's hair. "I have to go handle some business. I'll pick you up Friday. Okay, buddy?" "Okay." "We're watching dinosaur movie?" "Whichever one you want." Marcus hugged his legs. "Love you, Daddy." Those 3 words hit harder than any punch Lucien had ever taken. "Love you too, Marcus." Vivian walked him to the parking lot, while Marcus played within eyesight. "He really does love you," she said quietly. "I see it in how he lights up when you arrive, how he talks about you all week. I'm terrified of disappointing him." "Good. That fear will keep you honest." Vivian's hand rested briefly on his arm. "You're doing well, Lucien. Keep doing it." Lucien drove to Varela Tower, where David was waiting in one of the conference rooms with files spread across the table. "What's the complication?" Lucien asked. "The organization trying to muscle in on the Miami project? They're connected to remnants of Delgado's network, people who went underground after the trials." Lucien felt ice in his veins. "They know I testified?" "They know. And they're using the construction project as leverage to get revenge." David showed him surveillance photos. 2 attempts to sabotage the site already. They're sending a message. "What does Dominic want me to do?" "Handle it, but cleanly. No bodies. No violence that creates more problems." David's expression was serious. "You know how these people think? Figure out what they actually want and negotiate a solution that doesn't involve bloodshed." This was the test. The moment where Lucien could revert to old methods, violence and intimidation, or prove he'd actually changed. "I'll need access to financial records for the project and information about who's actually running what's left of Delgado's network." David handed him a secure tablet. "Everything's here, encrypted, eyes only." Lucien spent the next week analyzing the situation like a chess game instead of a war, identifying the key players, understanding their actual leverage, finding pressure points that didn't involve breaking bones. The leader of the remnant organization was a man named Carlos Vega, one of Delgado's former lieutenants who'd avoided prosecution by disappearing before the raids. He'd rebuilt a smaller operation and was using the Miami project to prove he could still hurt the Varela family. Lucien arranged a meeting. Neutral territory, no weapons, just conversation. They met in a cafe in Miami, both men flanked by security teams that stayed outside. Carlos studied Lucien with undisguised hatred. "You destroyed everything Antonio built." "I testified against a trafficking network. That's not the same thing." "You betrayed us to save yourself." "I made a choice. Work with the Varela family or die. I chose survival." Lucien leaned forward. "Same choice you made when you disappeared instead of going down with Delgado." Carlos's jaw tightened. "What do you want?" "To understand what you actually want. You're sabotaging a construction project. Why? Revenge? Money? Territory?" "All of it." "Be specific." Carlos pulled out his own tablet, showing financial projections. Delgado's network had revenue streams through 6 states. The Varela family absorbed most of those operations after the trials. "I want compensation for what was taken." "You want payment for lost trafficking revenue?" Lucien almost laughed. "That's insane." "Then I keep sabotaging your projects. Keep hitting Varela interests until the damage costs more than just paying me off." Lucien studied the numbers. Carlos was right about one thing. Continued sabotage would cost more than a settlement. But paying off someone connected to trafficking went against everything Lucien had spent 2 years building. "Counterproposal," Lucien said. "The Varela family offers you legitimate consulting work, security operations, construction oversight, legal work that pays well and doesn't involve trafficking." Carlos laughed. "You want me to go straight?" "I want you to survive. Federal prosecutors are still building cases. You think you're hidden, but they know where you are. They're just waiting for you to make a move that gives them cause to arrest you." That got Carlos's attention. "You're bluffing." Lucien pulled up files on his own tablet, federal surveillance reports on Carlos's movements, intercepted communications, evidence being assembled, all provided by David through channels Lucien didn't want to examine too closely. Carlos's face went pale. "How did you get this?" "The Varela family has resources you can't imagine. We could have you arrested tonight, but we're offering something better. A way out. Legal work. Protection from federal prosecution, a chance to rebuild without the danger." "Why would you offer that?" "Because I learned that breaking people creates more problems than solutions. And because Dominic Varela would rather turn enemies into assets than waste resources fighting wars that benefit nobody." Carlos sat back, processing the offer. "I'd be working for the family that destroyed Delgado." "You'd be working for yourself, building something that doesn't end with you in prison or dead." Lucien closed his tablet. "I'm giving you the same choice someone gave me 2 years ago. Take it or waste it. But decide fast because those federal prosecutors won't wait forever." 3 days later, Carlos accepted the offer. The Miami project continued without further sabotage. Carlos Vega became a legitimate security consultant, and Lucien proved to himself that he could solve problems without violence. When he told Vivian about it during Marcus's 3rd birthday party, she actually looked impressed. "You negotiated instead of threatening. That's growth. Had a good teacher." Lucien watched Marcus destroy a dinosaur-themed cake with the enthusiasm of someone who'd been promised sugar and delivered. "Someone who showed me that real power comes from building things instead of destroying them." Vivian smiled. "Don't give me too much credit. You did the hard work." Marcus ran over, frosting covering his face. "Daddy, come play dinosaurs." "I'll be right there, buddy." As Marcus ran back to his friends, Vivian touched Lucien's arm gently. "He's proud of you, I can tell." "He's 3. He's proud of everyone." "No, he watches how the other kids talk about their fathers. He knows his dad is someone special, someone who shows up and keeps promises." Vivian's eyes held his. "That's the empire you're building now, not money or power, just trust." Later that night, after the party ended and guests left and Marcus fell asleep exhausted from sugar and excitement, Lucien sat in his apartment staring at photos from the day. His son's face covered in cake, Vivian laughing at something Marcus said. The peaceful chaos of a child's birthday party where the biggest drama was whether chocolate or vanilla cake was superior.
This was his life now. No penthouse overlooking the city, no bodyguards following him everywhere. No mistresses or luxury cars or the hollow satisfaction of being feared. Just a small apartment, a job that paid the bills, and a son who said, "I love you, Daddy," like he meant it. The man Lucien had been 6 years ago would have seen this as failure, as settling, as accepting a life too small for someone destined for greatness. But the man Lucien had become understood something his former self never could. Real greatness wasn't measured in territory controlled or enemies crushed or wealth accumulated. It was measured in showing up for your son's birthday party, in choosing negotiation over violence, and becoming someone worth loving instead of just someone worth fearing. Lucien looked at the ultrasound photo still pinned to his wall, the first picture of Marcus, taken when he was just a possibility instead of a person. He'd almost lost the chance to know this child, almost died as the same broken man who'd valued power over everything that actually mattered. But he'd made a different choice, not a perfect choice, not a heroic choice, just the choice to try being better instead of accepting being broken. And somewhere in that decision, in the grinding daily work of showing up and learning and choosing differently, Lucien Moretti had found something more valuable than any empire. He'd found redemption, not the kind that erased his sins or made him innocent, but the kind that gave him a reason to wake up every morning and keep trying to be the man his son believed him to be. That was enough. That was everything. And as Lucien turned off the lights and settled into sleep, preparing for another day of work and parenting and proving himself worthy of second chances, he finally understood what his father had tried to teach him years ago. The most dangerous thing a man can destroy is the heart of a loyal woman who built his kingdom from the shadows. But the most powerful thing a man can build is the trust of a child who sees him not as a king, but as a father who shows up. Lucien Moretti had been both destroyer and builder, had lost everything and found what mattered, had fallen from the top of a criminal empire only to discover that the view from the bottom, where real life happened, where children laughed and former wives offered respect instead of love, where showing up mattered more than showing off, was more beautiful than any throne he'd ever occupied. And in the quiet darkness of a small apartment far from the penthouse where his empire had collapsed, Lucien finally made peace with the truth. He would never be king again. But he might, if he kept showing up and choosing better, be someone worth knowing. That was the real empire, the only one that actually mattered, the only one he'd ever truly own.